Hello, today we are going to learn how to warp a Merrick's loom for tapestry. The first thing that we're going to do is get out our ruler or measuring tape and just measure to make sure that your loom is at equal height on both sides. And if it's not, then we can move it up or down by twisting these wing nuts on the side of the loom. Now, if you have a newer loom, you will have two wooden clips. These clips come already on your loom. If you have an older loom, you'll have black plastic clips that you'll have to put on the loom yourself. So what you're going to do is you're going to start out with your clips backwards on the loom, and you'll see two little indentations in the clips. This is where you are going to place your warping bar. And the way we do that is just by holding it in between the clips using a little bit of pressure. So you're going to notice that your clips are slightly pressed together, holding in that bar. And you want it to be secure enough that you can kind of hit it and it's not going to fall right out. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to choose what warp coil or spring we're going to use. And this is dependent on what kind of weft and warp you're using. So the way you put that warp coil on is you just secure it on that side and then secure it on that side. And there we go, there's your warp coil. Next, we are going to take our warp. This is a Navajo wool warp that I'm using. And we're going to tie it on. Where you start warping depends on how wide your piece is. If you're doing a really wide piece, you'll just start from one side and go to the other side. If you're doing a thinner piece, we suggest keeping it on one side or doing two pieces, one on each side. If you do one thinner piece on one side, you'll need to balance the warping bar, because when these clips are taken off, the warping bar won't be balanced, and you just do that by tying a ribbon or a string around the other side. So we start off here just by tying a knot right onto your warping bar. So when that's secure, you'll notice what I did here was I've propped my loom up on something, and that's just so I can get my warp underneath the loom easily. So you can put it on books, on bricks, or you can just lift the loom every time you do that. So we're going to start here, and I am going to start by going up the back of the loom. And when I come back around the top, I'm going to place my warp in one of the dents, which is the space between the spring. And then I just bring it back down the loom, and then under, back up the back, and then I'm going to hit the warping bar again. And I'm going to do this from the back. When you hit the warping bar, the rule is that you always switch directions. So here I am, I hit the warping bar, and I'm going to switch directions, come back down the back of the loom, under the loom from the back, around that bottom beam, up the front of the loom, and then here I'm going to place my warp thread in the next dent over. And then I'm going to go back around the top of the loom, and here I come to the warping bar again. When that happens, I'm going to switch direction again. So I'm going to go around the warping bar and then back up the back of the loom. One thing that's really important to remember is that you never cross. You're always going around, hitting the warping bar, going back, going around, hitting the warping bar. But you're never crossing from the front of the loom to the back of the loom. So if you want to check if you've made any mistakes, one good way to do that is put your hand in between your bottom, your back and your front warp, and you'll notice that there's nothing crossing here. So you might want to do that periodically, because if you're not paying attention, you can make a mistake. So we're coming back up the back of the loom, over the top bar, and then we're going to go in the next dent over. So we have 1, 2, 3 warps in 3 dents. Now, depending on what kind of weaving you're doing, you may be going every other dent, but that really depends on what warp and weft you're using. The point is that one warp goes in one dent. So we're going to come back down front of the loom, under that bottom beam, and then here we are going to hit the warping bar again. When we hit the warping bar, we're going to switch direction and come back down. So we're going to come back down, go under the bottom beam. We're going to go back up the front of the loom, and then we're going to hit this warp coil again. We're going to put it in the next warp coil over. We're going to come back down, and we're going to hit the bottom beam from the back again. When we hit the bottom beam, we switch direction, come back up the back of the loom. Then we're going to go over the top. We're going to place this in another dent. We're going to come back down the front of the loom, under that bottom beam. From the back, we're going to go around the warping bar. Now at this point, you never really want to stop when you're in the middle of warping because you want to try to keep an even tension. It doesn't matter if it's a really tight tension right now because we'll tighten it later, but you want to make sure it's even. So this side shouldn't be any looser or tighter than the other side. So you never really want to let go of your warp when you're warping. But at this point, you may want to look and just sort of organize your warps, make sure everything's right. It's easy to miss a dent or to cross a warp. So just kind of make sure every couple of minutes that you're doing everything right. So we just switched directions. We're going to come back down behind, underneath that bottom bar, up the front of the loom. We're going to go into that next dent over. We're going to come down, and when we hit the warping bar, we're just going to loop it around and switch direction. Now the reason that we do this is because this secures the warping bar. So when we've started to weave and we've woven up till we hit the shedding device, we can grab this warping bar, which we will pull down here when we're done warping, and pull the warping bar up. And what that will do is pull your weaving towards the back of the loom so you have more space on the front of the loom to weave. So it's really important to use the warping bar. So we're going to come back around, over the top beam, into the next dent, oops, and then back down the front of the loom, under the bottom beam, back. And then we're just going to go around that warping bar again, and back under the bottom beam. So you're getting a hang of this? It's actually very simple once you understand the concept. And once you start doing this, it will become second nature to warp. So go back around the top beam, around the warping bar, back up to the top of the loom, into that spring, down the front of the loom, under that bottom bar, and then here we're going to hit the warping bar again, and so we're just going to switch direction. Now I might want to take some time now to kind of organize my warps back there. Now when you've warped as wide as you've decided you want to warp, next dent over, then all you do is tie back on to the warping bar. If you've been warping with a really tight tension, you might want to loosen your tension a little bit here, and that helps make it so your selvage, your edge on this side, isn't looser than the rest of your warp. So we can cut here, and I am just going to tie a little knot. Sometimes it's helpful. This is just the Allen wrench that we use to tighten the bolts on the shedding device, but I might use that to just make sure I have a tight knot. So I'm just doing a double knot. But I'm sure there are other knots you can use. So I'm going to just pull that tightly, and I'll trim that end a little bit. So here we are. I've warped as wide as I want to warp. Probably if I was using this weft, I'd be doing something a little bit wider, but this is just to show you what to do. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take these clips and I'm going to swing them out, making this warping bar loose. And then I'm going to slowly pull down. Now sometimes this happens if you have a pretty small spring, which I'm using. And what you're going to do when you're done warping anyway is take this bar, this is the spring bar, and just put that right there on the top of the loom. This will make your spring sturdier, and it'll keep your warp from falling out. So I'm going to bring that warping bar down. Now you can see, because I've warped only on one side of the loom, that my warping bar isn't steady. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of ribbon to steady the warping bar on the other side. As you can see, I just tied a ribbon to my warping bar here. I tied it around the bar, and then I tied it around the loom, and that just stabilizes my warping bar. The next thing I want to do, my tension's pretty loose, so I'm going to tighten my tension a little bit just by turning these. And what you want to do is measure to see that you're doing it evenly. So I made it a little bit tighter. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my clips and I'm going to spin them around the other way. If you have the black clips, you're going to have to take them off and put them back on, facing the other way. And now what happens is you have your shedding device here. The shedding device fits right here into this clip. And again, with plastic clips, it's a little different. You're going to have to put it in the hole and then take the other clip, put it on, and slide that in. But it's very similar. You want to make sure that your hole in your shedding device right here, which is where this handle goes, you want to make sure that hole is on the right side if you're right-handed and on the left side if you're So now that our shedding device is placed in the wooden clips, we're going to start to put our heddles on. Heddles can either be purchased from us. They come in 100 heddle rolls, and they look like this. All you do is you get this big roll, and you cut each heddle out, and it's this loop like this. Or you can make your own, and we have instructions on our website. So I'm going to start from this side. So I'm just going to pick up my first warp here, and I'm going to take this loop that is a heddle, and I'm going to place the whole thing behind my warp thread there. And then I'm going to bring those two edges together so I have secured that warp thread in between the heddle. And now what I do is I just take that loop and I put it over that bar. So here is a heddle, and if that is your warp thread, then you're going to put your heddle around the warp thread like that. And then this is the part, this space right here is what goes on that bar. So I'm going to skip this second one, and I'm going to pick up my third warp thread. Place it around, and then around the bar. You can see here how the heddles are placed around the warp and attached to the shedding device. So right here, there is that heddle looped around. You can see how that was done. And then you just take that heddle, bring it down that bar. And that's that. So we're just continuing here. We put a heddle on the first, third, fifth, and now we're going to put one on the seventh warp. So keep pulling this bar out slightly. And then the ninth warp. Again, make it like that, push it together, and put it on. And that is it for this side. So then you're just going to take this bar and you're going to slip it into the little place right there. And you're going to take your Allen wrench. You're going to secure that in there. Now we can check by moving the shedding device to see that it's making a good shed. And now all we're going to do is we're going to flip that shedding device over. We're going to loosen that spring, and we're going to do the exact thing with the opposite warps. So we're going to check back here. This warp has a heddle on it, so we're going to start with this next warp right here. Place our heddle, and bring that onto the bar. Now, if you're getting confused about which warp needs a heddle on it, you can always kind of go back here to the top, look how your warps are organized, check back down here, and you can even do something like weave some kind of stick in so you can see the difference between the heddles you've already picked up and the ones that you need to pick up. So here's this one. I like to kind of look down just to see that there's not a heddle on this. There we go. So this one has a heddle on it. Here's our next one. Does not have a heddle on it. And there we go. The concept's pretty easy once you get the hang of it. So here's that one has a heddle on it. This one does not. We just have one more to go. So you can see with a thin piece, it's very fast, very fast. The whole warping process is fast when you have a really thin piece. So once those are all secure, we're just going to check again by moving this. Looks good. I'm going to bring this into the hole. And I am going to screw that in tightly. So there we go, we have our heddle. The next thing we're going to do is take the handle for the shedding device and just place it through this hole here in the shedding device and take this little nut and screw it onto the end. Now the way that the shedding device works is you bring it down for one shed and then up and around for the other shed. Now, before we can use this, we need to take these little brass circles here and move that over the shedding device just so it doesn't lift up. So we'll do that on both sides right there. And there's if you have a Phillips head screwdriver, you can screw those in to be a little bit tighter. So here we are. We are all warped and heddled. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a piece of our warp thread and we're just going to put the loom in one shed, it doesn't matter which one, and bring this through like that. What this is going to do is this is just going to be kind of a base for us, so when we start weaving it doesn't fall through. So we're going to change the shed. we're going to go around one of the side bars, and we're just going to go through one more time. So we've started to weave. This is just our little base. And then we're going to go around this bar, and we're going to tie a knot. Just very nice and easy. So we have this all tied. Now we want to make sure, before we start, that our tension is tight enough. I don't think this is. With tapestry, you really want your tension as tight as you can possibly stand it. Because the better the tension, the more even your selvages are. And the easier it is to keep everything straight. So, as I did before, we want to measure each side to make sure that it's even. And if maybe it's a little looser on this side than that side, and you tighten this a little bit more on this side, and they're not exact, but the tension looks even, that's fine. What's important is that your tension is even. And now you can start weaving. The first thing you weave when making a tapestry is a header. So you just go through. We like to keep the ends in the back of our tapestries, so when you finish the piece you don't have ends sticking out. So you just go and place that somewhere in the back. We're in one shed right now. We're going to change our shed, and then we're going to bring that right through. The header is another piece of the base, so you're not going to see the header. And we recommend using whatever you're using for warp thread to weave that header. And after that, you can begin weaving. Some things we do recommend for weaving tapestry: a tapestry beater. It just beats down your tapestry to keep it nice and firm. You can also use a fork for that. Heddles, like we talked about before. This is a roll of 100 heddles. We also recommend a tapestry book if you really want to get into the different tapestry techniques. This is Tapestry Weaving by Kirsten Glassbrook. We also really like Tapestry 101 by Kathy Todd Hooker. And whatever your weft is going to be. So there you have it. A warped Merix loom for tapestry.